She was a poor widow struggling to raise her 3 daughters, and though every day was a fight to survive, she never imagined that everything would change the moment she found a dying Apache in her barn. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for the next emotional chapter. In the sun-scorched land of New Mexico, where the dry wind carried whispers of broken promises, Iris Morgan lived in a crumbling adobe shack that mirrored her fading hopes. At 32, Iris had already endured more grief than most face in a lifetime. Her husband Michael had died 2 years earlier in a cattle transport accident, leaving her alone with 3 young girls and a mountain of debt that spread like weeds in the desert. The girls, 12-year-old Claire, 9-year-old Rose, and little Lucy, just 6, had grown used to empty stomachs and tattered shoes. Iris worked tirelessly from before sunrise to well after dark, scrubbing clothes for wealthier families in town, sewing until her fingers bled, and selling whatever vegetables she could coax from her dry garden. The townsfolk looked at her with a mix of pity and judgment. "That woman should go back to her family in Mexico," the older ladies whispered as she trudged through the plaza carrying baskets of laundry heavier than her children. "She can't raise those girls alone. It's shameful how thin and wild they look." But Iris held on to a quiet pride that refused to be broken. Each night, after telling made-up bedtime stories to distract her daughters from their hunger, she would sit alone on the porch, gaze up at the stars, and silently vow that she'd find a way to give them a better life. Her grandmother had always told her that strong women don't give up, that they discover strength in places others only see defeat. One chilly October morning, as the last harvests had come and gone, Iris walked to the abandoned barn 1/2 mile from her home. The wooden structure had once belonged to the land's original owners. Though it had since fallen into decay, she sometimes found rusty tools or scrap metal she could sell for a few coins. The air inside the barn smelled of old hay and rotting wood. Sunlight slipped through the cracked boards, casting narrow beams onto the dusty floor. Iris moved carefully, watching for snakes or rats that might be hiding in the shadows. Then something caught her eye, something that made her heart skip a beat. A motionless figure lay curled in the barn's darkest corner. At first glance, she thought it was a corpse. The man lay on his side, his long black hair falling over his face. His leather clothing was worn and tattered, and his sun-darkened skin had turned pale. A dried, dark blood stain spread across the right side of his shirt. Iris's instincts wrestled between fear and compassion as she approached slowly. When she knelt beside him, she realized he was still breathing, though barely. He appeared to be no older than 30, with sharp features and scars that hinted at a life of hardship. His appearance and clothing left little doubt he was Apache, one of the warriors settlers both feared and hated. Finding him here in Mexican territory likely meant he was on the run. Iris knew she should leave, report him to the sheriff, and let someone else deal with the danger. Apaches were considered savage enemies of civilization. Helping one could get her in trouble with the law, or worse, endanger her daughters. But as she stared at the infected wound on his side and heard the strained rattle of his breath, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. "Oh, Lord," she whispered, pressing her hand to his fevered forehead. "What am I supposed to do with you?" As if her voice had reached him through the haze of pain, the man's eyes slowly opened. They were dark as midnight, full of pain and defiance, and Iris instinctively drew back. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Two strangers caught in a moment neither of them had chosen. He tried to sit up, but his strength failed him, and he slumped back down. "Don't move," Iris said gently in Spanish, unsure if he even understood. "You're badly hurt." To her surprise, he answered in broken but understandable Spanish. "Are you going to turn me in?" His words hung in the dusty barn air like a question too heavy to answer quickly. Iris studied his face, seeing more than just unfamiliar skin and foreign features. She saw a human being in pain, a man who might have family out there waiting. She saw herself, what she had become over the past 2 years, someone trying to survive in a world that offered no kindness. "No," she finally said, "but you need proper medical care. That wound's infected." He closed his eyes as though weighing a decision that had taken far too long to face. "My name is Ayanka," he murmured. "It means walks alone. It fits. I've always been alone." "I'm Iris," she replied. "And if you're staying in my barn, you won't be alone much longer." In the days that followed, Iris fell into a dangerous routine. After sending her daughters to collect firewood and fetch water, she'd sneak out to the barn with strips of cloth torn from her own slips, medicinal herbs her mother had once taught her to use, and bits of food she could barely spare. Ayanke proved a difficult patient. His pride made him resist help, and each time she came close to change his bandages, his body tensed like a cornered animal ready to lash out. But Iris had been raising 3 daughters on her own for years. She knew exactly how to deal with a stubborn man. "You can either stay here suffering in silence because of your pride," she told him one morning while preparing a fresh poultice of herbs, "or you can let a mother help you heal so you can make it back to your people. Your call." There was something in her voice, firm, but not unkind, that broke through Ayanka's defenses. Little by little, he began allowing her to treat his wound, take small sips of water, and accept modest portions of food. During those quiet, tense moments, Iris started to notice things about him that didn't match what she'd always been told about the Apache. His hands, rough and scarred, handled the water she gave him with surprising care. His eyes, when they weren't clouded by pain, held a sharp intelligence and a deep sorrow she knew too well. And his voice, when he did speak, carried a kind of poetry that turned even simple words into something almost musical. "Why are you helping me?" he asked one afternoon once the fever had eased enough for him to hold a proper conversation. "Your people and mine, we're supposed to be enemies." Iris sat down on a pile of old hay, taking a moment to think before answering. "My people," she said finally, "are my 3 daughters. Everything else is just noise." She paused again, eyes drifting through the slats in the wall toward the tiny silhouette of her home. "And I've been on my own in this world for 2 years now. I know what it's like to be seen as the enemy just for existing." That night, her daughters discovered her secret. Claire, the eldest, had noticed how her mother returned home each day with less food than she had left with. At just 12, she had already inherited both her mother's grit and the protective instincts of an older sister forced to grow up too soon. She followed Iris all the way to the barn and peered through a gap in the wall, watching in silent shock as her mother tended to the wounded stranger. Terrified by everything she'd ever heard about savage Apaches who kidnapped children and slaughtered entire families, Claire raced home and burst through the door shouting, "Mom's helping an Apache." Her younger sisters, Rose and Lucy, immediately broke into frightened tears. When Iris returned, she found the 3 of them huddled together in bed, trembling with fear. "Is it true?" Mama Claire asked with a shaky voice. "Is there really an Apache in the old barn?" Iris sat beside them and gently pulled them into her arms. For a second, she considered lying, inventing something to ease their fear. But she'd always raised them on the truth, even when it hurt. "Yes," she said quietly. "There's a man in the barn. He's Apache, but he's alone. And he's hurt. He's not going to harm anyone. But aren't the Apaches supposed to be evil? Rose asked, her big eyes wide with worry. People say all kinds of things about those they don't understand. Iris replied, pulling them closer. That man has a name just like we do. He's wounded like we've been, and he's alone like we are. I can't just leave him there to die. Claire, always the bravest of the three, pulled back slightly and looked her mother straight in the eye. Do you want us to meet him? The question caught Iris off guard. She had expected fear tears, maybe even a threat to tell someone in town, but Claire had the same quiet compassion that Iris had carried all her life. Only if you want to, Iris said carefully. But you have to promise me you won't tell anyone. People out there wouldn't understand. The three girls exchanged glances, speaking with that unspoken sibling language only sisters share. Finally, Claire nodded. We want to meet him, she said for all of them. The next day, Iris brought her daughters to the barn. Ayanka had improved a great deal. He could now sit up without help, and the infection in his wound was finally subsiding. When he saw the girls peeking from behind their mother, something in his expression softened in a way Iris had never seen before. These are my daughters, Iris said gently. Claire, Rose, and Lucy. Ayanke looked at them for a long moment before speaking in careful Spanish. They're beautiful, like desert flowers, and they have their mother's eyes. Lucy, the youngest, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity only little ones seem to have. Why is your hair so long? She asked. Ayanke smiled, and Iris realized it was the first time she had seen that expression on his face. The smile transformed him, revealing the kind spirit behind the hardened shell of a warrior. In my tribe, long hair is a sign of wisdom and our connection to the spirits of our ancestors. Do you have daughters like us? Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The smile on Ayanka's face faded, replaced by a sorrow so raw it made Iris's heart ache. I had a family, he said softly. They were killed by soldiers 2 years ago. That's why I'm alone. The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. Iris knew that kind of loss words could never fully capture it. And even though her daughters were still young, they recognized that same sadness in his eyes, the one they had seen in their mother after their father's death. Claire slowly stepped closer and sat down beside him. We lost our dad too, she said with the solemnity of someone far older than 12. But Mama says that when we lose people we love, we have to take better care of the ones we still have. Ayanke looked at her in wonder. You're very wise for your age. I have to be, Claire replied simply. I'm the oldest. From that day forward, the barn visits became something like an adventure. The girls would help their mother carry food and water, and in return, Ayanke would share stories from his tribe tales of the mountains, Apache customs, and the wisdom passed down from his grandparents. In exchange, the girls taught him Spanish words and told him all about their small-town life. Iris watched these moments unfold with a mix of warmth and unease. She saw how her daughters were slowly blossoming under the kind of male attention they had been missing since their father died. She noticed how Ayanke seemed to change around the girls, how their innocence and acceptance seemed to reach deeper places in him than any remedy ever could. But deep down, she knew this fragile arrangement couldn't last forever. One afternoon, while Ayanka played a traditional Apache game with the girls using stones and sticks, Iris realized she no longer saw a dangerous outsider. She saw a good man, one who had endured unspeakable loss. A man who treated her daughters with more tenderness and respect than most men in her own community ever had. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else. The weeks slipped by like pages from a book Iris never thought she'd be part of. Ayanka had fully recovered, but instead of leaving like they'd both assumed he would, he kept finding reasons to stay just a little longer. First, it was to fix the leaking roof of the barn. Then it was to reinforce the fence that protected Iris's modest garden from wild rabbits. "I can't leave knowing the place I sleep in floods every time it rains," he said with a grin that he no longer bothered to hide, and that garden needs proper guarding before winter hits. Iris would pretend to object, but in truth she welcomed every excuse he found to stay. His presence had brought something into their lives she hadn't even realized was missing, the feeling that she didn't have to face the world entirely on her own. For the first time in 2 years, someone else was carrying even a piece of the burden she had long borne alone. Ayanke did most of his work at night or during the early hours of the morning times when the neighbors were less likely to see him. He had a natural gift for fixing things Iris had long since given up on. The well, which had been barely trickling water, flowed clean again after he cleared and repaired it. The old wood stove, which used to fill the house with smoke, now burned efficiently, warming the entire cabin. But it was during the afternoons that he truly came alive. After the girls had finished their simple schoolwork, Ayanke would sit with them in the barn and pull out pieces of wood, leather, and stone from an old worn bag he kept close. With these humble tools, he created wonders. "In my tribe," he explained while carving a small owl from a piece of cedar, "we believe every object should be beautiful as well as useful. A knife that only cuts is just metal. A knife that's beautiful and cuts well, that's a gift from the gods." Claire watched with fascination as his hands turned ordinary scraps into art. "Can you teach me to do that?" she asked. "I can," Ayanke replied, "but first you must learn to see the beauty that's already inside the wood. I just help it come out." Iris stood at the barn's entrance pretending to mend clothes, but really she was watching him, watching the quiet, powerful transformation he had brought into their lives. There was something almost meditative in the way he worked his large, calloused hands, moving with a gentleness that contradicted his rugged exterior. One afternoon, Ayanke showed Iris a necklace he had been crafting in secret. It was made from tiny turquoise pieces, carved into leaf shapes, strung together with delicate braided leather that showed incredible skill. "It's beautiful," Iris murmured, her fingers brushing over the polished stones. "It must be worth a lot." "It's for you," he said, plainly placing it gently around her neck before she could refuse. "A gift for saving my life." Iris reached up to touch the necklace, feeling the soft weight of the stones against her skin. No one had given her anything so beautiful in years, maybe ever. Michael had been a good man, but romance was never a part of their practical marriage. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You should sell it to someone who can pay you well." "Who says I haven't already been paid?" Ayanke answered, his eyes meeting hers. "Your friendship, your daughter's laughter, the home you've given me. That's worth more than money." That night, after putting the girls to bed, Iris sat alone on the porch, her fingers tracing the necklace as she stared at the stars. The cool weight of the turquoise resting on her collarbone was a constant reminder that her life had quietly taken a turn she never expected. She had become a woman who was hiding an Apache in her barn, a woman who looked forward to each day just to see him smile, a woman who had grown used to having a man she could trust. That thought filled her with both fear and quiet excitement. It was Claire who finally voiced the idea that would change everything. One morning, as they ate tortillas made from the last bit of flour they had left, the 12-year-old studied her mother with eyes that had grown far too wise for someone her age. "Mom," Claire said carefully, "why don't we sell the things Ayanke makes in town?" Iris nearly choked on her weak coffee. Claire, we can't just... Why not? The girl cut in. No one has to know who made them. You could say they came from traders passing through. She shrugged. Those rich folks in town pay a lot of money for pretty things like the ones he makes. Iris stared at her daughter in stunned silence. At just 12 years old, Claire already understood the social and financial realities of their situation better than many adults did. It's too risky, Iris murmured. If someone finds out, it's also necessary, Claire replied, gesturing at her worn-out shoes and their meager breakfast. Look at how we're living, Mom. Ayanke can help us, but only if we let him. That afternoon, Iris brought the idea to Ayanke. To her surprise, he didn't immediately shoot it down. I've thought about that too, he admitted. I have the skills, and you all have needs. It'd be foolish not to find a way to work together. But if someone recognizes the Apache style, she began, but he cut her off with a sly smile. They won't, he said confidently. I can make pieces that look Mexican, Spanish, whatever you need. Craftsmanship is its own language. All I need to know is what kind of things those rich folks like to buy. Their first trip to sell was terrifying. Iris wore her best dress 2 years old and patched more times than she could count, and carried a basket with 5 of Ayanke's pieces, 2 necklaces in a Mexican design, a set of small decorative knives, and 2 hand-carved Catholic saint figures that looked so lifelike they seemed ready to speak. The first shop she entered belonged to Mr. Felipe Castaneda, a man who sold imported goods to the wealthier families in the region. When Iris showed him the items, his eyes lit up instantly. "Where did you get these?" he asked, turning one of the knives over in his hands with the eye of a collector. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. From a trader who passed by my place," Iris stammered, praying her nerves weren't obvious. "From the south, I think Oaxaca, maybe." Don Felipe examined the items a few moments longer, clearly impressed. "I'll take them all," he declared. "And if you can get more like these, I've got customers who'd pay handsomely." Iris returned home with more money than she'd seen in months. When she laid out the coins for Ayanke and the girls, the barn erupted with squeals of joy and tight, spontaneous hugs. "We can buy real flour," Rose shouted, bouncing up and down. "And new shoes," added Lucy. Claire, always the pragmatic one, had already started doing the math. "If Ayanke can make 5 pieces a week, and you can sell them at those prices." Ayanke watched the scene unfold with a look of awe that slowly gave way to something deeper. Iris recognized that expression. It was the face of someone rediscovering a purpose they thought they'd lost forever. "I never thought," he murmured, "that I'd feel useful again, that I'd be part of a family." The word family hung in the barn air like an unspoken vow. Iris felt her heart race because she had been thinking the same thing, though she hadn't dared to say it aloud. The months that followed were the most prosperous the family had known since Michael's death. Ayanke worked tirelessly crafting pieces that grew more intricate and beautiful with each passing week. Iris had developed a sharp instinct for what would sell and built quiet connections with shopkeepers in nearby towns. But more valuable than the money were the quiet changes that took root in their home. The girls laughed more. Iris bought herself a new dress for the first time in years. The little cabin had been repaired and improved enough that winter storms no longer scared them. And at night, after the girls were asleep, Iris and Ayanke would sit together in the barn talking about everything and nothing. He spoke of his tribe's traditions, of the freedom of living under the stars, of the pain of losing everything he'd ever loved. She told him about her hopes of giving her daughters a real education about the struggles of being a single mother in a society that left little room for independent women, about the loneliness that had clung to her like a second skin for the past 2 years. One of those nights when the March air was soft and carried the scent of early wildflowers, Ayanke took Iris's hand gently in his. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "My wound healed months ago. I could have left any time." Iris felt her heart stop. "Why didn't you leave?" Iris whispered. "Because I found something here I didn't even know I was looking for," he replied, his fingers gently lacing with hers. "I found a home. I found love. I found a reason to live that's bigger than just surviving." Tears rolled down Iris's cheeks. "I'll stay if you'll have me," he continued, voice steady. "Not as a secret hidden in the barn, but as a man who belongs to this family. I know it won't be easy. I know there will be consequences, but I'm willing to face them if you're willing to give me a chance." Iris's answer was a kiss she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. A kiss that tasted of hope, second chances, and love blooming in the unlikeliest place. When they pulled apart, their eyes glistened with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Stay. Stay forever." The spring of 1848 arrived with a kind of prosperity Iris had never dared dream of. Her home now had a new roof, real glass in the windows, and more food than a family twice their size could eat. The girls wore shoes without holes and dresses without patches. Ayanke had built a hidden workshop where he crafted wonders that passed for high-end artisan work from Oaxaca. Don Felipe Castaneda, the town's merchant, started asking more pointed questions. "My clients in Santa Fe pay double for pieces like these," he told Iris one day. "Can't you convince your supplier to come sell directly?" "You know how artisans are," Iris answered with a tight smile. "Very secretive about their methods." But Don Felipe had begun to notice that the deliveries came too regularly, the pieces always immaculate as if they hadn't traveled hundreds of miles. His eyes narrowed as he studied Iris's nervous face. In town, the change in Iris's life hadn't gone unnoticed. The women who once pitied her now eyed her with suspicion and jealousy. "That woman's hiding something," muttered Doña Remedios as she washed laundry at the river. "No one goes from rags to comfort without help or without doing something shady." "Maybe she has a rich lover," another suggested maliciously. "A married one. That's why she's so secretive." Rumors eventually reached the ears of the new sheriff, Captain Aurelio Mendoza. He'd arrived from Arizona 2 months earlier, fresh off a string of successful campaigns against rebel Apaches. Tall and whip-thin, he had cold eyes and a scar that ran from his ear down to the corner of his mouth. "Apaches are like wolves," he'd told the mayor. "They seem calm alone, but you're always their prey." When Mendoza heard about Iris, an isolated woman with sudden wealth avoiding questions, his predatory instincts kicked in. She was worth investigating. Disaster struck on an April afternoon. Doña Remedios and 2 other women arrived unannounced, masks of politeness barely hiding their curiosity. "Iris," Doña Remedios called, pounding on the door. "We've come for a visit." Iris opened the door, heart pounding, catching a glimpse of Ayanke working in the barn through the back window. "What a surprise. I'm afraid the house is a bit messy." "Nonsense," Doña Remedios interrupted, pushing her way inside uninvited. The women moved through the house like soldiers in enemy territory, scanning every detail, mentally calculating every sign of comfort. "Such lovely furniture," one said, running her hand along a table Ayanka had carved. "And these curtains, such fine fabric," added another. Just then, Claire burst in, unaware of the guests. "Mom!" she cried excitedly. Ayanka says the necklace for Rose will be ready by... She stopped, cold-faced, draining of color as she realized what she had just said. Silence as heavy as stone fell. The three women looked at one another, expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. Ayanke, Doña Remedios echoed slowly. What kind of name is that? Iris felt the world tilt beneath her feet. It's the nickname Claire gave her doll, she stammered. You know how children are. But Doña Remedios wasn't fooled. She could tell the difference between childish fantasy and an accidental truth. Her eyes narrowed. Claire, come here, dear. Tell me more about this, Ayanke. Before the girl could answer, the back door swung open. Ayanke stepped in, concerned by the raised voices. He stopped the moment he saw the unfamiliar faces. It was too late. An Apache! One of the women shrieked. There's an Apache in the house! Chaos exploded. The women stumbled over each other, trying to flee. Doña Remedios screamed about wild savages as she ran toward town like she was carrying the devil's fire. Ayanke stood frozen, watching everything fall apart. I have to leave, he said quietly. Right now. No. Claire clung to his arm. This is your home. I won't put your family in danger, he said, eyes full of pain. Iris took his face in her hands. You are our family too. We'll face this together. But then came the sound they all dreaded, hooves thundering closer, angry voices, the clinking of weapons. Captain Mendoza had gathered 12 men in less than 20 minutes. The word Apache was enough to justify immediate violence. Surround the property, he shouted. Don't let him escape. Ayanke pushed Iris and the girls into a corner. No matter what happens, don't try to protect me. I won't let you get hurt. Ayanke, Claire cried. Don't let them take you. He dropped to his knees and pulled the three girls into a tight embrace. Be strong. Take care of your mother. And remember, everything we shared was real. No one can take that from us. The door burst open as Mendoza kicked it in. Rifle raised, his men flooding in behind him. There's the savage, he barked. Ayanke rose slowly, hands in plain sight. I haven't harmed anyone. This family took me in when I was wounded. They aren't to blame. Shut your mouth, Mendoza snarled, slamming the butt of his rifle into Ayanke's side. He staggered but didn't fall, didn't cry out. Iris lunged instinctively, but one of the soldiers shoved her back violently. Don't touch my family, Ayanke roared, losing control. Your family, Mendoza sneered. A Mexican woman playing house with an Apache dog. He punched Ayanke in the face, drawing blood. The girls screamed in horror. Take this savage away, Mendoza ordered. He'll be tried for unlawful incursion. As they dragged Ayanke from the house, he shouted, I love you. Never forget that I love you. And you, Mendoza said, turning to Iris, harboring an enemy of the state. Your daughters will be placed in decent homes. No, Claire rushed forward. My mother didn't do anything wrong. Mendoza shoved her hard, and Claire hit the ground. Iris sprang at him like a lioness defending her cubs. Don't touch my daughters! Mendoza grabbed her by the hair and threw her against the wall. You've got a choice, he growled. Come peacefully, or we burn this place down with everyone inside. It was an impossible choice. Iris kissed each of her daughters, whispering promises through tears. Take care of each other, she murmured. Remember that your mother loves you more than anything. As they dragged her away, Iris caught one last glimpse of Ayanke bound to a horse, his face bruised, but his eyes burning with a fury that promised retribution. 3 little girls clung to the porch, watching the 2 people they loved most in the world being taken from them, unsure if they'd ever see them again. The storm had come, and it had swept away everything. The women's prison in Santa Fe reeked of damp stone sweat and despair. Iris had been thrown into a cold cell with 3 other women, all accused of various moral failings, one for adultery, another for theft, and the last for witchcraft, which really just meant she knew too much about healing herbs for some people's comfort. For 2 weeks, Iris barely touched food. Every part of her ached for her daughters. Were they safe? Were they hungry? Was anyone there to comfort them at night when they cried for her? And Ayanke, was he even still alive? Visitation, the jailer grunted one morning, swinging open the rusted bars. Iris was taken to a small room where Father Sebastian waited, the same priest who years ago had tried to convince the Vasquez de Coronado family to send their daughter to a convent. His face now was a strange mix of genuine concern and bureaucratic duty. "My child," he began gently, "I've come to offer you a path to redemption." Iris met his gaze, eyes hollowed by weeks of grief. "Redemption from what, Father?" "From corrupting yourself with a pagan," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Captain Mendoza is willing to reduce your sentence," he explained, "if you publicly renounce your association with the Apache and admit that you were deceived." "And what happens to Ayanke?" Iris asked. Father Sebastian looked away. "That's not something I can control." Iris stood slowly. "You're asking me to betray the man I love to save myself. I'm asking you to save your soul." "My soul," she said firmly, "is just fine. It's your conscience that may need saving." Meanwhile, 20 miles away at the military outpost, Ayanke hung from chains in a cell built to break both flesh and spirit. Captain Mendoza visited daily, not to question him, but to savor his suffering. "You know what's going to happen to those girls?" he asked one day, lounging in a chair while Ayanke struggled to remain upright. "They'll grow up hating you. They'll be told their mother was a disgrace who lowered herself to live with a savage." Ayanke raised his head, eyes blazing with a fire Mendoza's beatings hadn't extinguished. "They know the truth. They know love." "Love," Mendoza scoffed. "Love doesn't put food on a table or a roof over your head." But Mendoza had grossly underestimated the spirit of the 3 girls he'd torn from their home. Claire Rose and little Lucy had been placed with so-called respectable families meant to rehabilitate them, as Mendoza put it. Claire had been sent to live with the Herreras, Rose with the Castillos, and Lucy with the Garcias. The separation was deliberate. Mendoza knew they'd be stronger together. But what he didn't count on was Claire's unshakable will. At 12 years old, Claire had inherited her mother's sharp mind and the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd grown up shielding her younger sisters. Every night she snuck away from the Herrera household and found ways to communicate with Rose and Lucy. "We have to help Mama and Ayanke," she whispered during one of their secret meetings behind the church cemetery. "But first we need information." It was Rose who stumbled upon the discovery that would change everything. The Castillo family had a son, Joaquin, who worked as a clerk in Captain Mendoza's office. The 16-year-old had noticed how the 9-year-old cried silently each night, and his heart softened. "Why are you so sad?" he asked one afternoon as she helped his mother with sewing. Rose, who had her mother Iris's plain-spoken honesty, told him everything. To her surprise, Joaquin didn't respond with fear or disgust, but with quiet outrage. "That's not right," he muttered. "My father always said you measure a man by how he treats the helpless, not by the color of their skin. In the weeks that followed, Joaquin started paying closer attention to the documents that crossed Mendoza's desk. What he found horrified him. The captain had been falsifying reports of Apache attacks, stealing supplies meant for soldiers, and selling weapons to smugglers. "Captain Mendoza isn't a hero," he whispered to Rose one night. "He's a thief and a liar, and he's terrified someone will expose him." When Claire received that information, it felt like a gift from heaven. If they could prove Mendoza's corruption, maybe they could discredit his charges against their mother and Ayanke. But they'd need solid evidence, and to get it, they needed help from the inside. That help came from an unexpected source. Iris had found an ally in prison, Maria Concepcion. The woman jailed for witchcraft had been watching Iris for weeks, taking note of her quiet strength and refusal to break under pressure. "You don't belong in here," she said one night while the others slept. "And neither do I." Maria Concepcion had been arrested for exposing the town doctor who had been diluting medicine for the poor and selling full doses at inflated prices. Her so-called witchcraft was simply her knowledge of real herbal remedies that worked better than the doctor's frauds. "I know people who can help," Maria murmured. "People who hate corruption as much as we hate injustice." Through a hidden network of merchants, servants, and workers Maria had built over years, they managed to establish contact with the outside world, and more importantly, get a message to Ayanke. The message was hidden in a loaf of bread, brought in by a young guard named Diego. Diego hadn't been bribed with money, but with medicine Maria had made for his sick wife. "Your family is safe," read the tiny note tucked into the crust. "The girls are working to help us. Iris is strong. You must stay strong too. A friend." For the first time in weeks, Ayanka smiled. If the girls were taking action, if Iris was holding on, then hope was still alive. That same night, while Mendoza made his routine prison rounds, Ayanke pretended to be weaker than he really was. He had been conserving his strength, healing in silence, waiting for the right moment. "You're still thinking about that Mexican whore," Mendoza sneered, stepping closer to the cell. "Still think she's waiting for you?" "I know she is," Ayanke said calmly, "because what we have is real. Something a man like you could never understand." Mendoza's temper flared, and he unlocked the cell to deliver the beating himself. It was exactly what Ayanke had been waiting for. With a move he'd rehearsed in his mind for days, he used the chains around his wrists as a weapon, wrapping them around Mendoza's throat and pulling him close, whispering in his ear, "Now, let's talk about my terms." Outside the prison walls, Claire waited in the shadows, clutching the stolen documents. Joaquin had copied evidence strong enough to bring Mendoza down. Freedom was close, just within reach. But the price of that freedom was still unknown. With the iron chains cinched around Mendoza's neck, Ayanke felt for the first time in weeks a sense of control over his fate. The captain writhed his face, turning red as he realized just how badly he had underestimated the man he thought was broken. "One word too loud," Ayanke said in a voice like ice, "and these chains become your permanent collar. Now let's talk about how you're going to release Iris." But Mendoza would never get the chance to bargain. At that exact moment, Claire had arrived at the office of Federal Inspector Robert Vasquez, who had just come in that morning from Mexico City to investigate growing reports of corruption in the region. Inspector Claire said with the fierce resolve she'd inherited from her mother, "I have proof that Captain Mendoza has been stealing from the government and falsifying military reports." Inspector Vasquez, a man in his 50s with a reputation for being utterly incorruptible, studied the 12-year-old girl bold enough to accuse a military officer. When he saw the documents Joaquin had copied, his face hardened. "Where did you get this, young lady?" "My mother and the man I love are in prison for helping a wounded Apache," Claire said without hesitation. "But Mendoza locked them up because he was afraid they'd uncover what he was doing. All my mother did was show Christian mercy." An hour later, Inspector Vasquez arrived at the military fort with a full escort of federal soldiers, just as Ayanque had finished forcing a confession from Mendoza about the stolen weapons and names of his accomplices. Captain Mendoza, the inspector, thundered as he entered the prison. "You are under arrest for treason, theft of military supplies, and falsifying official records." Mendoza turned pale the moment he saw the documents in the inspector's hands. He knew instantly that his entire empire of corruption had just come crashing down. "That savage attacked me," he shouted in desperation, pointing at Ayanque. "That savage," the inspector replied with disgust, "just handed me even more proof of your crimes. And according to these documents, you illegally imprisoned a Mexican woman, and this man without evidence of any wrongdoing." In Santa Fe, Iris was released that very afternoon. Maria Concepcion embraced her with tears in her eyes. "I knew someone like you wouldn't stay in here long," she whispered. "Now go be with your family. Live the life you deserve." As Iris stepped outside the prison, her heart nearly burst with joy. Her 3 daughters came running toward her, followed by Ayanque, walking freely under the golden afternoon sun. Their reunion was a blur of tears, hugs, and the kind of love-filled words that had gone unspoken for far too many weeks. The girls clung to their mother as though they'd never let her go again, while Ayanque waited patiently nearby, his eyes glowing with the same intense emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Iris whispered as they finally held each other. "Never," he replied, kissing her forehead. "The promises we made, no prison can break them." Claire stepped forward with a grin that radiated satisfaction. "Mom, Ayanque, there's something else you should know. Inspector Vasquez has launched a full investigation into all of Mendoza's cases. When he found out you and Ayanque were locked up without any real evidence, he didn't just order your immediate release, he approved financial compensation for the wrongful imprisonment." And she added, eyes shining, "The inspector said Ayanque's artwork can now be sold legally. We don't have to hide anymore." 6 months later, the family was running a thriving artisan business that blended Apache craftsmanship with Mexican artistry. Their shop in Santa Fe drew customers from as far away as Texas and California, all eager to buy the one-of-a-kind pieces born from the union of 2 rich cultures. Iris and Ayanque had married in a ceremony that honored both Apache and Mexican traditions. Father Sebastian, who had come to deeply respect the couple's genuine love, officiated the wedding with words that reached beyond the cultural divide. "Today," he said during the ceremony, "we are not just joining 2 people, we're uniting 2 worlds, proving that true love knows no borders." The girls blossomed in this new life, surrounded by love and safety. Claire had begun learning Ayanque's carving techniques and showed a natural talent that promised to carry on the family legacy. Rose had developed a sharp eye for design, creating patterns that wove together Apache and Mexican motifs in fresh, inspired ways. Even little Lucy contributed, helping to polish stones and organize materials with the seriousness of someone who understood her role in something special. One afternoon, as they worked together in the workshop behind their new home, Iris looked around at her family with a heart overflowing with gratitude. Ayanque was patiently teaching Claire to carve an eagle from wood, while Rose and Lucy decorated necklaces with bright beads. "What are you thinking about?" Ayanke asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "I'm thinking," she said, smiling softly, "how the worst day of our lives turned into the start of the best. If it hadn't been me bleeding in that old barn, you'd have found another way to change the world," he said with a gentle smile. "You've got a heart that can't help but love no matter the cost." That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Iris and Ayanke sat on their porch, staring up at the same stars that had silently watched their story unfold. "You know what I've learned from all this?" Iris whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "What? That real love isn't just something you feel, it's something you choose. It's choosing to see past differences, to pick compassion over fear, to build bridges where others see walls." Ayanke held her closer, thinking about the long road that had brought them from that abandoned barn to the peaceful life they'd built together. "And I've learned," Iris added with a knowing smile, "that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst tragedies." In the distance, the soft sound of their daughter's laughter floated from the bedroom, reminding them of what they had created, something beautiful that would last for generations. A family not born from bloodlines or tradition, but from love, mutual respect, and the courage to fight for what's right. Their story had begun with a lonely woman trying to survive and a broken warrior who had lost all hope. It had grown into a family that proved day after day that real love can overcome any prejudice, any injustice, and any attempt to divide what was meant to be whole. And that more than anything else was the legacy they hoped to leave behind. That true love will always find a way to bloom, no matter how barren the desert may seem. Wow, what a journey, right? If you've made it to this part of the video, thank you for sticking with me through this emotional roller coaster. Writing this story was not just an exercise in fiction, it was a deeply personal experience. Iris and Ayanke isn't just about forbidden love or survival. It's about the courage to show compassion in a world that often punishes kindness. To me, this story is a reminder that love isn't defined by blood culture or expectations. It's defined by the choices we make. Iris could have walked away from Ayanke that day in the barn. She had every reason to. But she chose empathy over fear. She chose to see a human being in pain, not an enemy. And that choice changed everything for her daughters, and even for Ayanke, who had long stopped believing he deserved a future. There's something so profoundly human in that. We live in a world that's still divided by race, class, and prejudice, but this story shows us what's possible when we see people, not labels. And don't even get me started on Claire. That 12-year-old girl showed more bravery and leadership than most adults. Her resilience gives me hope for future generations. So now I'd love to hear from you. What part of the story moved you the most? Was it the romance, the family bond, the fight against injustice, or maybe something else entirely? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. I read every single one and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart like it did mine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little reminder that love, real love, always finds a way.